Hey guys, welcome to our first episode in the Nova Project podcast, where we're exploring issues of faith, the workplace, and the public square. I'm so glad to have you with us today. Of course, in this show, we have our co hosts, James and Matic. So glad to see you guys. It's been a long time coming for us to have these conversations with each other. How are you doing, guys?
Good, good. Ready.
Great, good to be here.
So where are you guys hailing from?
Well, you go ahead, James.
Yeah, so I'm based out here in Geneva, but originally from the good old United Kingdom of Kingdoms. So,
Yep, you can't mistake the accent.
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm further south, down in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. And I'm also with James here in Europe in Geneva. And I'm so glad to having the chance to kind of have this conversation. So let's kind of jump right in. So there's some things that people believe that we don't mix, like oil and water or pineapple and pizza. And I do believe that they do mix, by the way. But then, of course, there is faith and the workplace, and people kind of see a disconnect between those two things. I mean, what do you think that is?
I think we've perhaps had a lot of people who have tried to impose their religion on the entire workplace. And perhaps that's the only model we've seen or prevalent problem that we've had. And I think that maybe has caused this backlash of we don't want, we don't want our workers, our people who come to work to be evangelizing whole day. We actually wanted to do some work.
Yeah.
So kind of like bad taste in your mouth, I guess.
Hmm. Now I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. James, what are your thoughts, James?
yeah, I think it's been gradually retreating over, probably over a lengthy period of time. More recently, I think definitely there's a sense of, well, you have to tolerate everyone and what everyone thinks,
Yeah.
which basically equates to being quiet, not really sharing what you believe. And so I think the what I call the whether it's political correctness, religious correctness, has basically, at least over here in Europe, has very much taken over the space of faith in the workplace, and people have decided, well, it's safer to be quiet than to name my faith.
Now I hear that. I remember, so I grew up in the Caribbean, and I remember as a young, zealous Christian in the workplace, pretty much in some ways, like Matit was saying, just wanted everybody to know about Jesus and love the Lord and everything. I mean, I did my work though. That's one thing I made sure that I did. But I remember I drew some art, like a cross and that kind of stuff on a notepad, and I kind of put it up in the office by my cubicle. And funny enough, the guys actually, up to like good like 20 years afterwards, still had that artwork there, in the office. And I remember back then I tried to get some like saints together at lunchtime to pray, and we did a couple of those prayer times together, and
Yeah.
it was good. It was good, but I think they have some differences in the Caribbean and in Europe, and how we go about that, is really can bring some conflict in terms of they don't really go together in that same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so James, I mean, I know right now you're a pastor, but of course, before you were pastor, you were working, in the workplace. How did you find the climate for faith and tolerance of faith in the workplace, kind of before your kind of pastoral journey?
Yeah. Yeah, so I spent most of my working career working in one company, which was an American company. So they had even had a little bit of a faith, a faith background in the very early starts of the company when it was first set up. Used to work for Procter and Gamble, and most of the time it was pretty much head down, projects to do, stuff to get done. Um, you know, 8 till 7. Got to hit the numbers, and so most of the faith conversations that took place would primarily come through personal relationship. Through maybe hanging out with the team members, spending time together. But there was an intentional desire for believers to gather, and so there was a small group that used to gather on a regular basis to pray over the workplace, to pray for each other. Again, which I found very encouraging. But in terms of the space of faith in the workplace, it was pretty much limited to, I would say, the personal relationships that you would develop and the opportunities that the Lord would open up in that way to speak about the good news of Jesus, really.
Interesting. Did you find a similar kind of vibe with you, Matik, in your workplace? I know you work right now, in the workplace
Hmm.
as VP. Actually, got to say congrats on your recent promotion, man. Congratulations, brother.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah,
Good
it's
stuff. Good
interesting.
stuff. So yeah, so tell me a little bit about how that plays for you, in Trinidad,
Hmm.
and then you have another layer, not only Trinidad, but then you're at an executive vice president level,
Hmm.
which has its own dynamics, its own kind of relationships that could,
Yeah.
go differently than when you were on the floor. So tell me, how was that dynamic for you? What are your thoughts? What does that look like in that space?
It's very interesting because I think the Lord has given me a lot of favor, like right now in my workplace, so that actually, through, I guess, being very vulnerable with people and sharing my faith journey, and um, even with my boss, and it came to the point where he's like, okay, Matic, we need you to pray as we start these meetings. So every leadership meeting, he asked me to say a prayer at this right now. So, but I think it started, as James was saying, with the personal relationship between me and him, and actually it started actually with God speaking to me about being a better support to him, and
Hmm.
loving him unconditionally, and nurturing a relationship as a boss.
Wow.
And so I just, and that enabled us to get closer and enabled me to kind of be more overt with what was just going on, just shame was going on with me. I'm not trying to convert anybody, but just saying, like, right now, God is telling me X or Y, or things are happening in my life, etc. And I think that opened a space for him to say, "Hey, Matic, I want you to pray at the start of these meetings." So that's that's where it's at now for me personally. But I think it all starts. I agree with James. It's a personal one-on-one that kind of opens up avenues uh, for other things to happen.
That's pretty powerful. I mean, and when you say that, what comes to mind is, that command we have from Christ, to love one another.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And I think as we are deliberate in doing that, loving all men, that love opens up opportunities for conversation,
yeah,
opportunities to serve, and then you can have convos while you're serving,
yeah,
and in a very organic way, you kind of get to cheer and show Christ, in a context that is normally about work. But
yeah.
so no, I hear that. I think that's pretty awesome. Let me ask a question though. So as a church, do you think that? So let me backtrack. So there's a
Mhm.
I call it evangelical narcissism that really kind of sits in the mind of believers, where there's a great divide between what we call secular and what we call sacred, where God is really concerned about spiritual things, quote unquote, Bible school missions and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to making those numbers at Procter and Gamble, or being degree of innovation, in Trinidad, or when it comes to math or science, God's kind of absent or not very useful, in those spaces. And we have this divide in our minds concerning, where God's operating, where God is effective, where God works. Do you see or feel, that sacred divide? Have you personally kind of struggled with that? And have you seen that in a broader context in other believers, in your friendships and even in your church, as you're a pastor? I'm curious to find out, what you felt in your own heart over the years, your
Hmm.
own journey with that divide. We all were impacted by it, and how we've grown out of it, and how do we see that playing in other believers' lives?
Yeah, I think it's a good analysis. I mean, two small stories. Just recently, I was chatting with a couple of believers. They were looking at seeing, we've gone to have a conversation about establishing something in their workplace, and they had contacted a number of people who are believers, just to begin to reach out, begin to think about how, can we, just gather, even just begin to pray. And they were really discouraged by the response. And
Mm,
so I was thinking, wow, we've got, and no judgment here, but wow, we've got all these people that are probably going to church on Sunday, worshiping, praying, but then when given an opportunity to think, and I'm only talking maybe once a month, to do that, it's not on the radar screen. I was thinking it's a little bit like we have chickens, and the cockerel, he crows himself in his, he has the chicken shed, and he crows there, makes a little noise, and then when he goes out in the garden, he does exactly the same thing. He's still making that same noise. But I was thinking, in one sense, when we come to believers, they can make they make a little noise in their church building, but when you put
mm.
them out in the public square, then it can be a little bit of like a different. I'm a different animal now. I'm not a cockerel anymore. I'm a mouse there. So
Yeah.
I love that. I love that
Yeah.
analogy.
Yeah. For me, what has been particularly disturbing, um, when I look around the workplace, is that there are people, for me, um, who, as a believer, they isolate themselves.
Mm,
So they come to work, they don't eat lunch with anybody else, they don't go to any functions, and they, but if you speak to them, you know very much, they're very much people of faith and religious and all that kind of stuff. But it seems as though, um, they see the work as, I come here to do a job, and I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to go home, and I'm not trying to really, do more than that, or interact with people too much, or kind of, I guess, join the community of the workplace.
mm,
And for me, that's disturbing, and that's the main thing I observed. And even when, like, you try to have a prayer meeting, like, they wouldn't turn up. Just as James was saying, maybe we would meet weekly for a while, a couple of years back, and it would be like two or three people at the most. Usually it was just two of us, and but nobody else would come. So I found that disconnect kind of disturbing. um Personally, recently, God, with the new position and all, Adrian, um, God was like, you're gonna need help, and plus, I guess, just with all the talks we've been having, Adrian and James, about workplace community, I was like, this is an opportunity for me to do something differently. And I
mm.
called all the Christians that I knew in my workplace together. I said, look, I'm starting this new position. It's kind of like a Daniel call. The king has had a dream, and he needs me to interpret. And I need all of you to pray so that God will give answers. Right? So there's this dream of making the company innovative.
Sure.
And I've been charged with doing that, but I need God to really give us some answers. And so I called everybody together, and I was actually pleasantly surprised at how many people were like, "Yes, wow, great, we're gonna do it. We're gonna meet once a month." Now the test, of course, is in if they actually turn up. But the initial response was really enthusiastic and positive. I had one we had one prayer meeting so far, and maybe about half of the people showed up, so it was pretty good, which I think is great. If one person turns up, I'm still happy, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think there's a movement, and for me, there's a movement, a shift in how I approach work, as in
Mm,
trying to gather people together to join with me in a way of prayer and support and getting wisdom from God. Um, but I'm hoping that there's also been a shift of believers getting more involved in the workplace and not
yeah.
isolating themselves, because you can't affect anything you're not a part of. That's just, that's how it works.
True.
The yeast has got to be in the dough, the salt has got to be in the food, and if you're just
Yeah.
by your desk
Amen.
doing your work, it makes no sense.
No, I love that. I love that. I mean, I think so. One thing that kind of comes to mind too, as we're talking, is that so the Bible gives us stories, right? I mean, one big story, one big narrative, and then other stories. So you mentioned Daniel, for example.
But Adrian, what has been your experience though?
Oh, me in that regard.
Yeah,
So for me, in terms of looking at the whole issue of as a young Christian, I think I had a very sharp division between the sacred and the secular, in my own heart, my own thinking.
yeah,
And I think that was the common thought of most believers around me at the point in time
yeah,
where God is about these activities, and these other activities you just kind of do the best you could. Resources, you just kind of you're not a bad person, but you're not really looking for God to really show up in that space, right?
yeah, yeah,
And over the years, through the scriptures, God has been really teaching me how integrated He is, with life and work and creation. I mean, like if you think about it, so I think is in Acts, I believe it is, where it's saying that God created all the nations, from one man, from one blood, and he decided, what times they will be and their boundaries, right?
hmm,
So it means that a nation is something that God creates. And the question is, has God ever created anything that he doesn't care about or that he doesn't have thoughts about or interest in?
yeah,
I don't think so. So if God is the God of nations and work and economy and geography and all those things are part of nationhood, it stands to reason that our God is pretty interested in those things because those things come together to make a nation run.
yeah,
So as I've over the years begun to allow the scriptures to kind of heal me of my own division, I've become a really strong advocate of having a unified view of life.
yeah,
And the truth is, that's how the Hebrews looked at life. The Hebrews had one view of life. I was keen to note that their word of worship, I think, is I should ask James, the Hebrew scholar, but I think is avoda. I think, and I could be wrong, but I think it's something that I'll check it out. But work and worship have the same root in their language.
right,
So they're together. They're not separate things.
yeah,
And Adam at the beginning was work and worship. There were two. It was the same thing.
yep,
So I think we've lost that. And we need to reclaim that. And part of our passion at the Unifor Project is to help sew back together what has been torn asunder.
Amen.
that's good.
Through talks like this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I know. I think you're totally right. I've just finished reading a book on the first missionary to head into China, a guy in the 16th century called Matteo Ricci,
Oh, wow.
and reading that clearly, he's called by God to go to a place to get to understand the culture and then to think about how to be salt and light in that place. And I was thinking about it, if everyone saw their workplace in that light, that they had been called by God to go to that place, to understand the culture, to think about how to be salt and light. I think it would, absolutely transform the way people, one, see their work, and two, see their workplace. Um, because again, there are good things about our workplaces, but there are things again that need to be redeemed as well. There are maybe
Yeah.
practices that need to be redeemed, which and we know that we reap. We reap what we sow. And so
Mm.
where there's things, good things sown into workplaces, I believe those reap profits, those reap long-term employees hanging around and staying on. But then when there are bad things sown, then that reaps bad publicity. That often reaps employees leaving. And so and believers, they've got the best seed on the block in that sense in terms of what they can sow into these places. But
Yep.
I came away from reading that thinking, yeah, absolutely. The context is totally different. The sacrifice is totally different. This guy left, everything to go over there, and yet the similarities are very, very strong. There's a calling, there's a mission field, there is a context, and there's the call to be salt and light in that place.
What's the name of the book? Probably you could let our readers check it out. You remember the
It's
name of
called
it?
The Wise Man from the West by Vincent Cronin. The Wise Man from the West. So it was written back in the 1950s, but it's one of the most fascinating books in terms of just thinking about bringing the gospel into a culture. So
No, I love it. I love it. I love it, man. Thanks for that. And I mean, I can't help to agree. I mean, I believe if we do really see ourselves as God's kind of missionaries, at work, and live that way intentionally, transformation is almost guaranteed. I mean,
yeah,
I really do believe that in my heart, and working and praying, along those lines to see that. So, but let me take a step back, ask a question. How would you think we could get the church to see themselves in this way? From local assembly level, family level. Yeah, I mean, what's some of your thoughts? Because you mentioned these are believers and all believers go to church. So if believers are doing this at church, it stands to reason that at church we may not be discipling our people along these lines. It stands to reason we may not be having these conversations. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Growing up in church, have these convos been commonplace? Work and faith and public square and God, has that been a common convos in your church experience growing up, guys?
I don't know who's going first. Maybe I'll go. I'll go.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm like waiting. Like, is James gonna talk? um, for me, that's a big question, Adrian.
Hmm.
With a that requires a long answer because I think that there is a lot wrong with how we have been discipling believers and helping them to mature. So I think really a lot of believers in the world worldwide are immature, and when we mature, this thing would happen naturally. Um, so there needs to be so I would say in church, a lot of the things that we teach and preach and do um, is not really preparing believers to be effective for God in life. It's kind of preparing people to be effective in church, and um, it's not building in them an internal capacity to carry God everywhere they go and to have a deep uh, relationship where that living water is sort of overflowing out of them. So if you take a simple thing like uh, people having a relational, conversational relationship with God, where they're actually guided and led by the Holy Spirit, um, that's something that needs to be attended to, worked on to get something to place. So you should be able to walk into your workplace and Holy Spirit tells you, hey, talk to this person and just give them a little word of encouragement. They need that today. And you'll be able to walk in that. What are you doing, Adrian?
Sorry. I was trying to get you to be the main
That's
video, but
it's clearly not working.
yeah, but that's not working. I was trying to get you to be the guy. But yeah, go ahead.
keep preaching it, Matty. Keep preaching it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So yeah, so there's when all you have really is a format for going for volunteering in church and doing stuff,
Mm,
or at most you have a format for evangelizing in a way that introduces you to go to somebody and say, do you know Jesus? Jesus died for you, and la 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 la. When that's the only formats you have, and that's the depth of your understanding, depth of your walk,
mm,
then it's very hard to be effective, because you're not really carrying Christ, you're really carrying religion, or carrying your church membership, or
mm,
carrying you know. So we really have to be leading people into getting into a deep relationship with God, and full of the life of Christ, that when they walk into a room and work, into a board meeting, they change the atmosphere, that all of a sudden things open up, and all of a sudden there's this life-giving atmosphere, just because what they're carrying on the inside. But
amen.
we
Amen.
haven't become to that maturity. We don't shine that way. We are still, many of us are still walking around with just a belief system to share. That's all we have to share. We don't really have life to share. We have a belief system to share. We want people to believe what we believe,
That's
and
powerful. Say that
yeah.
again, Matthew. Say that again. That's powerful. Say that again. For our hearing. Say that again. That's powerful.
Many of us just have a belief system to share with people. That's all we have. And if they don't believe, if they have a different set of experiences that say, it's evolution, and I'm not saying that evolution and God are exclusionary. I'm not gonna go there. But that's probably another conversation. But if they have a if all you're trying to do is convince people to believe what you believe, that's much less powerful than actually bringing life to
Mm,
people, that has nothing to do with changing their beliefs. It has more to do with changing their heart.
Yeah.
When you're bringing love into the room, you're bringing compassion, you're bringing kindness, you're bringing righteousness, truth, goodness. You're bringing things into the room that shift the very spiritual atmosphere. If the life of Christ is so rich in you, if the Holy
Hmm.
Spirit is so upon your life, that when you walk into a room, hope comes in with you, and you're going to address a problem in the workplace, and you're looking at 10 years down the road, and it looks bleak, and the market is drying up, but you
Yeah.
walk into the room and you bring hope, and people start to feel hopeful, and you start to
Possibilities.
speak,
Yeah.
forth, and you start to declare something different, and all of a sudden people leave the room feeling lighter. You haven't said Jesus, not
mm,
once, but you have imparted life, and
yeah,
I think that's where we need to get to. So I think that's why I think it's a long answer, because we need to begin to disciple people to really draw closer in Christ and
mm.
walk in that way that Christ walked. Yeah. So I'll come off my soapbox now.
Well, because of all these convos that you get a chance to have a soapbox on purpose. So that's James. What are your thoughts, brother?
Yeah, again, I don't want to keep banging on about my chickens, but but it was quite significant because I think there's two things at play. And so going back to the analogy, so we had this with this cockerel, and he's got an identity. The chickens are there pecking around, but when he's out in that public square, he carries something. He carries. There's a presence there in that sense. And so I think part of the issue is just what Matty was saying, knowing that we can carry the Holy Spirit into these places. And I think we underestimate the impact that can have when we own that identity.
Hmm.
Everyone knows, everyone who's been in the workplace knows when you've got, well, I don't want to call it a rotten egg, but when there's someone who is just painful, and it's painful. But you underestimate the counter side in terms of, like you're saying, someone who can bring life. And then this morning we got up and we went to our chicken shed to let all the chickens out, and the cockerel was gone. We really don't know what happened.
Oh,
Basically,
wow.
whether a neighbor got frustrated and stole it, but uh, again, I was thinking, um, the world always wants to silence, that life in that sense. And so
Yeah.
we need to realize, I think there are almost there's two vital factors at play. One is knowing our identity,
Mm,
that
mm,
spirit-filled, mission-given believer.
yeah.
But two, realizing that actually you know, we have as much a right to having a voice, bringing life into that place as anyone else, and we shouldn't let anyone try and steal that or rob that place. Because now, if that happens, then right now it's a pretty boring garden now. It's quite quiet. The chickens are pecking around. There's no
Mm.
noise coming out in that. And I was actually thinking, wow, this is a pretty powerful analogy for what's happening, because there are many workplaces where people are getting, they're getting the job done. They're
Yeah.
scratching around. They're laying the eggs, but there's not so much. There's not so much. There isn't necessarily that noise. And I'm not saying it should be a discordant
I hear
cock-a-doodle-doo.
you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But there's that sense of, people know, everyone who walks up and down our street, they know there's the cockerel there. They
There's
like it.
chickens here.
They like
Yeah.
the presence there.
Yeah.
There's life there. And now that life is gone. And I was thinking, when we don't realize our identity and who we are, then that life that can be brought into the community can be robbed and stolen from it. And
Yeah.
so maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I thought it was quite significant that the that the community voice was stolen
On stolen.
the very morning of our first podcast. So
No, I
I think
mean,
that's good. That's
yeah, go
really
ahead,
good.
James. Yeah, go. Sorry, go ahead. Wait, Amati, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. I think that's really good. I love that cockerel.
No,
But
I think it's
a
crystal
great
clear.
analogy, and
I think
identity is so important. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so
Go
even
ahead.
on that point of identity, Matic, so I think a real core issue comes down to that thing about identity, where we forget to help believers understand that they're called to be sons and what a son is.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
I was doing a recording or something else just this week, and I was making the point that a child is different to a son. A child of God is different to a son of God. So children of
Yeah.
God, they're born of God, they're filled with the Holy Spirit, but their orientation is towards what can God do for me?
Yeah.
How can God help me? How can God get me out of this problem? Is very children. Children normally look to the parents to do everything for them, and that's a stage you go through. But there must come a shift where you move from a child, to a son, and we actually use different Greek words to describe it in the scriptures. Where Rios is a mature son, and Technon is a child, right?
Yeah.
And the two core things that make a Rios son. One is his intentionality to take on God's character and display it. And then second, his intentionality to take on responsibility of God's purposes and drive it forward. So those two things are what make a real distinction between children and sons. And we're not helping believers mature or transition from being children into sons, because sons take on responsibility.
Yeah.
They know the inheritance they have from the Father, and they go out into the world wherever God will send them, and they utilize their inheritance. Be it character inheritance, like you mentioned, hope and love and joy, and then even spiritual inheritance in terms of their giftings and their wisdom and their talents, and they're consciously doing this on purpose in wherever they are, and then go back to the father report how things went, how things are, and have that kind of dynamic. And I don't think we're helping believers make that transition. Um, we still pretty much helping them to be children that are forever eating and
Hmm.
not really coming to maturity in that respect.
Well, I think there's a little piece in that, in terms of how that intersects with church, in
Mm,
that, think of it. Your church life is basically in receive mode most of the time. There's one person on a stage, or maybe two, and you are just in receive mode. Um, so it builds into the narrative that I am a receiver. I am just here to receive. And
mm,
I know there are many, and I'm sure, you know, there are lots of changes happening. I'm seeing changes happening, to be honest. But in terms of getting people activated and involved in different things, but once there's this kind of subtle message of there's one person that wants that takes such a dominant position that everybody else receives from that top person, and that's kind of like the building a dependency, so to speak.
Mhm.
I mean, like in the most immature cases, there's still believers who say, well, I have to make a big decision. I'm gonna get a word of God from the man of God, or from
Right.
the prophet, or from whatever.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
Or I got a new car, let me go and get it blessed by so and so, or whatever. There's that deep dependency of this other person is the one who's close to God and who has the stuff, and who to really come into that identity, we have to really destroy that whole system, and come to a place where we are all going to become those mature people
Mhm.
who are representing our Father, who are, we don't all become pastor, or preacher, or whatever, of course, and we don't want all of us, but
Of
we
course.
we
Yeah. Yeah.
we want to become those, like, so strong, and so all, that in the kingdom there's room for a lot of cockerels. We could have where we're all walking in the fullness of who God created us to be, and and there's a more mutual giving and taking, rather than this kind of hierarchical structure we've become accustomed to. So when we shift that, I think it will send a message that, hey, you know what, this is not just one person appointed by God that we all look to, but this is more of a thing where there's each person having such a strong something that I need, that we all give and receive, and we all interconnected, and it's more of a flat thing, and it's more of a network thing, and that then changes our mindset, so when we go into work, we're not looking for, oh, you have a problem, you know what you should do, you should come to my church, or you should talk to my pastor, or you should
Yeah.
talk to so and so. It'll be more
Mm.
of like, oh yeah, I've got something, I've been empowered, I'm a son, I'm walking in the fullness. So how we do things in church affects how we live outside. Well, I shouldn't say in church. I should say in our church, local church organization, or church setting.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so I just, that's a pet peeve of mine. Again, maybe I'm airing all my pet peeves in this podcast. But I think it's so key to getting that maturing that you're talking about, Adrian. Yeah.
No, I hear that. I hear that. I mean, so I think so. I'm with you, and I share the pet peeve, and I think it's a bit of both. So let me see what I mean. So I like when I look at the early church and what they produced in terms of disciples,
Yeah.
and so they had different types of meetings. So they would have meetings where it was pretty much a one man talk, and they listen. For
Hmm.
example, they had it in Solomon's porch where Peter would talk to them in Solomon's porch, and that was kind of like a one man talking, and they're listening.
Yeah.
Or Paul when he preached so long that my guy dropped out the window, sheer boredom, you know, a sermon, pretty much as a whole day sermon. So I think you have those. What I think we have done is balance. So, because from
Hmm.
written scriptures, the majority of the meetings would have been flat meetings. That would have been
Hmm.
majority. And then
House
we
to
had,
house.
yes, that would have been majority. And then we
Yeah.
had interspersed listening meetings, but those were the minority, while the whole house was a majority. And I
Yeah.
think we've done is kind of shifted that so that one is more kind of more than the other.
Hmm.
And but I think you still need both.
Yeah.
Only because you would have men who are gifted in that respect, and there are times where you want those gifted men to kind of really just pour,
Yeah.
their heart and study into God's people,
Hmm.
uh, you know, out of their gifting and those times. At the
Yeah.
same time, have that network environment being
Yeah.
the one that you have pretty often, where people are kind of talking and sharing and building each other up, and like you said, just come into a place where I feel comfortable. I have something to share as well too. So when I go to work, I do really feel like I carry God with me. I
Yeah.
really do have a word to give. I
Yes.
really do have a hug to share, a holy kiss to give. If one has not harassment sexually in your workplace, HR to make sure a holy kiss, holy hugs are allowed. different days, guys. Different days.
Yeah. I don't know, James. I mean, tell me, as a pastor,
Mm,
right? I don't want to seem like if I'm knocking you.
mm,
But I agree with Adrian. You know, there are these giftings to equip the church that they need
mm.
to have that. But how do you see that working out in your outworking?
Yeah. Yeah. Clearly, I don't want to do myself out of a job, so I have to be careful what I say. But yeah, I think it all goes down, especially for church leaders, which is how do they see their role and
Hmm.
Yeah.
their congregation.
Mm.
And so I think there can be a danger of seeing them as a means of which of purely building the church in the sense of, more people. I think someone once said, bums, bucks, and baptisms. That's what it's all about. More bums on the seats, more
The
bucks
three B's
on
of
the
church
plate,
growth.
and more baptisms in my church. You see, and so if that's your measure, if that's what matters, then that's again you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas if the vision is more, um, I I've heard the analogy used that I take my car to the garage because my car needs a good service and it needs basically sometimes it needs an oil change. There's bits which need replacing, some work done
Hmm.
on it, and then it's ready to roll because the car wasn't built to just go into the garage for the service. The car was actually built to be driven around, to move places. And so if you see, in a sense, the church more as the garage where cars come in, to get their encouragement, to get their MOT, but actually, then really the purpose of the car is not to stay in the garage, or simply, but it's actually to go out and drive. And so, in that sense, the vision is focused outward. Now, it's great to talk these things, but then you have to think about then what are you doing? Like you
Hmm.
said, develop disciples which can see themselves as sent missional people who are called to bring life, because that will then require very different programs than maybe if you're just worried about bums, bucks, and baptisms.
Participants.
Yeah. I like that analogy with the car. It's
No,
good.
agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. So question. So let's say that, well, let's backtrack. So we've looked at the whole issue of faith in the workplace, and looked at sometimes how environments can be sometimes antagonistic to it, especially in Europe and Western Europe, as
Mm,
the whole issue of humanism and secularism have increased. In the Caribbean
mm,
it's not as bad as it is in Europe, but it is slowly kind of
Yeah.
getting there, where the Christian idea, or the Christian cloud that was in the air, is no longer filling our world anymore. It's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and
mm,
other ideas are coming up that people are thinking that are as equal to Christian
Hmm.
ideas, or more important than Christian ideas, and the ideas that we hold to be true for the scriptures can be seen as retrograde and even hostile to human progress and human development, which would suggest to me that, as Christ said, that as we continue down the line, the whole issue of persecution, the whole issue of suffering, the whole issue of being ostracized, those become real possibilities and real things we have to face and deal with if we want to stand, for God's truth and God's word in the marketplace, in the workplace.
Yeah.
How do we prepare our people to deal with suffering and persecution in the workplace? How do we find that balance? Because we don't want to be telling people, indiscriminately go and preach in your workplace and get fired. But if you get fired, God is with you, and you suffer. We don't want to be giving people that kind of advice that is
mm,
idealistic and full of
mm,
folly. But
Yeah.
at the same time, you don't want to be telling people always be quiet and hush and protect
Mm.
yourself and always protect yourself because wisdom is protection. Because that's not true either.
Mm.
It's just difficult balance. I mean, what do you guys think about the whole idea? What are your thoughts?
Well, I love the book of Daniel for wisdom on how you do that.
Mm,
Workplace, living in a workplace powerfully. I think Daniel is such a fantastic, amazing perspective. So first of all, Daniel, you gotta know where is the line that you're gonna stand up for your values and stand up for your beliefs, and you're not gonna compromise. Where is that line? Where does
mm,
God want you to put that line? Daniel, you know, they came in, they taught him magic and astrology, and he was like, I'm great. I learned it. I'm 10 times better than everybody else in it.
right.
Right. So he clearly he saw no issue. That didn't compromise his personal beliefs. But
Mm.
they tried to make him eat some kind of food that he didn't want to eat. He didn't, say, I'm not gonna. He said, listen, test me. If I'm not 10 times better,
Mm,
then I'll eat it. So he kind of was very clear in what I'm gonna do, what I'm not gonna do, how I'm going about it. Um, and but when he knew what he was standing for, he says, I'm gonna pray to my God. I'm not gonna bow down to your statue. There's no there's no if, no ands, no buts, no maybes. That's not
mm,
happening. But he
mm,
was prepared to take the consequences. He didn't go out and try to start a lobby his governor to change the laws so that it would be
right.
more favorable to him. He didn't go and start a riot around the place. He just said, whatever comes, if I'll take the consequences, and if God protects me, protects me. If not, if not. I think we've lost that. We've become where we want to change a secular society to become our religion, right?
Mm.
We want it to all to march to our drum. But that's
Yeah.
not how it works.
No.
Ungodly people will do ungodly things.
Yep.
You stand for what you want to stand for. If you get persecuted, that's how it's going to go. You are not less than Christ. Christ was persecuted. Take your persecution, and how you live through your persecution in itself is a testimony of the God you believe in, and how God sees you through that. So I think that's important. I think we want the whole world to make a environment that's so nice and cushy for us.
Yeah.
Not
Mm.
gonna happen. Not our job. you know, we stand up for what you believe in and be willing to stand.
Mm.
But know what's important and what's not. Daniel knew what was insignificant. They changed my name to I worship Baal. They changed the Holy Boy's names to some kind of. He said, "Fine, call me whatever you want to call me. I don't care what you call me." They didn't make a fuss.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And the second thing with Daniel and his friends is that they were for the king. They were for the king's success. They were
Hmm.
for people. They supported people. They didn't try to go into power and then change everything to be Jewish or Israeli or whatever. No,
Mm.
they they had their Babylon system. They continued to, but they served the people well. They wanted them to prosper. They wanted them to do well, to have success, and we have to have that servant mentality. We're here to make our business places success, to make our
Mm.
successful, to make our boss look good, to
Mm.
to to help. We're not here to try to change things around to suit us, or no.
Yeah.
We want to. How can I serve you? How can I help you? And I think that's a key attitude that they had.
Mm.
And that enabled Daniel to find favor with Daniel. Kings came and went, and Daniel was still at the head of the
Yeah. About three different
yeah, three. Yeah, because they all
administration.
knew Daniel was for. I'm for you. I want you to succeed. I'm supporting you in whatever you want to in what you want to do. That of course I won't compromise on my personal beliefs, but hey, you want to expand your kingdom? Yeah, I'm with you. You want to know what that dream was and what God's gonna do? Yeah, Joseph was. You want to gather. I'm going to help you gather all this stuff in the barns and weather through the famine. Come on, next slide. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to provide real solutions and real help from God, um, to serve the world. So
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I mean, and I think too that it. So it's not entirely believers' fault that they are holding on to or trying to change things around them because you'd appreciate from the time of pretty much Constantine. You know,
Mhm.
we would have had the birth of Christendom, where there was the merger of the government and religion, and for the first time, religion.
Worst thing that ever happened to us.
Yeah, Christianity was made an official religion for the
Yeah,
first time.
yeah,
For the first time, taxpayers' dollars were used to build churches for the first time.
yeah,
For the first time, there was tax-free benefit for I mean, a lot of things change, and from that seed up until now, Christendom has worked its way through all of our educational, financial
yeah,
systems, and has seasoned it to a degree, and at some levels it has been good, because I would prefer to be under Christendom than Sharia law. So at some levels it has been good, but at the same time, like you, I feel like God is taking the church back to pre-Constantine days, where we're no longer the loved majority,
Mm.
but where we're now the tolerated in some respects and hated in other minorities. So we've been
yeah,
taken back to the first environment we were in before Constantine. And I don't think we as believers have thought and talked about it.
yeah.
And I don't think we're preparing our people to live in a pre
Mm.
Constantine
Mhm.
environment where things are not for you, they're
Mm.
against. But yet, is in that 300-year period before Constantine, the church had its most magnificent growth,
Mm.
where the
Exactly.
most, transformation, on the ground. It was in that period when they were marginalized.
Yep.
So we're gonna have to find back our roots again if we're gonna
Mm.
really bring change to our societies through the means that the church did it pre-Constantine, and using our workplaces as an environment
Yeah,
in where we do that.
yeah.
Yeah, this is good stuff, guys. Meaty.
No, that's I agree with you so much, Adrian.
Mm.
I think that whole Constantine period was like 10 steps backwards for the church, because you know Christ said, "My kingdom is not of this world," and
Mm,
the means by which the kingdom grows, the means by which God expands, is not by political power
Mm.
and the law, legislation, and all these things that we keep trying to do. We keep trying to legislate the kingdom. That's not how the kingdom
Mm.
works.
Mm.
And if you try to do it that way, what you're gonna get is not the kingdom. You're gonna get people being conformed to something, but
Mm.
their hearts haven't changed.
Mm.
And so that's why, you
Yep.
know all of that is a false kind of progress. It's not real.
Mm.
It's not real. When we're in a hostile environment, then you know who's really changing,
Mm.
and
mhm,
and what's the source of your power. When you have
Mm.
to go in the lion's den, and only God can shut the lion's mouth. When you're thrown into the
Mm.
furnace, and only God can take you out, then you know whether you really are in the kingdom and God is
Mm.
for you, than if you everything is just set up for you.
Mm.
Um, it's when the rubber hits the road. So with in this whole pandemic, you know, will I wear masks? Don't force us to wear masks. Let's take that as an example. You want everything to conform to the fact that you want to go into church and sing or whatever and
Mm.
congregate. Well, why? Why should it? What is the source of your power? What is the source
Mm.
of your strength? What is the source of your hope? What are you relying on,
Mm.
um, to come through this, to expand and grow? So yeah, I'm
Mm.
so agreeing with you. But I see it's what, how much minutes? 53 minutes. Are we? What is it? Wrap up time? What was it?
yeah, but yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, we can go on for another hour, but of course, we will have other episodes.
Yeah.
Any last words you want to share, James and Matik, before we kind of bring this convo to a close about faith in the workplace and public square?
Yeah, I just want to go back to, in a sense, preparing. You talked a little bit about how can we prepare people,
Mm,
because I do agree. I do think there's a sense of, greater sense of, well, I don't use persecution, but I do think there's a greater sense of judgment.
Mm,
Um, and I think it's an important thing to really grasp, because if, if there is no if because a lot of people are working amongst a bunch of atheists in that sense at the moment. But if you go back to the idea, which most of them say, well, there is no, how can we know what truth is? How can we then? What gives them the right to judge me and my beliefs? Because if there's no truth, then in a sense, my beliefs are just as valid as their
Yep.
beliefs. And so I think there are, I think apologetics actually is going to play a really important place in the workplace, because you can begin to challenge people. Well, why are you judging? Why are you judging me and my beliefs? Because if you don't believe in any absolutes, then what gives you the right to do that? Are you saying that what standard are you holding me to? And so, in one sense, then, I think for a believer, then that can begin to be quite freeing as well. So, because then, in one sense, um, you can think, well, actually, what right have they got to judge me? I don't have to worry about that, because if they believe there's no standards, then how can they be judging me by what standard are they doing that even now? So that for me, and again, that can be very freeing in terms of beginning to think about, then I'm free to operate because I know who I'm serving now in this place. So
It's good.
No, love it, love it, love it, love it. Well, guys, we've come to the end of our first episode. So enjoyed this convo with you guys, sharing your wisdom, your insight, your experience. I hope those of you who are listening to our show here glean some that you found to be helpful, beneficial to your life of faith. In the workplace and in the public square. So I want you to kind of keep locked on to what we're doing. You can go to our website listed below. You can check us out on YouTube, or also on Facebook as well, and follow our talks, follow our chats, follow our ways of giving resources to really strengthen you to be believers of strength, and power, and character in the workplace. So next episode, we'll be looking at some more topics around this issue, and looking forward for you to be joining us then. So until then, God bless.
It was fun, guys. Enjoyed it.
great.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Bye bye.